Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday the 8th of May 2025. Following the UK's withdrawal from the European Union, the Home Office introduced the skilled worker visa in December 2020. This route is intended to support economic growth by attracting people with skills that the country needs and was designed to offer flexibility to respond to the skill shortages across the UK labour market. Since 2021, a number of changes have been made to the entry requirements to respond to changing circumstances and demands. In 2022, the route was open to care workers to address shortages in this sector following the COVID-19 pandemic. And again in March 2024, entry requirements were tightened to address the government's aim of reducing net migration. Use of this skilled worker visa route has been significantly higher than the Home Office initially anticipated, with 1.18 million applications to the route having been made since 2021. So, today we will be questioning the Home Office on how it manages the skilled worker visa route, given the huge volume of applications, and how the department processes these applications to provide a good service to customers. In addition to this, we'll be examining how the Home Office is addressing non-compliance and abuses with the skilled worker visa route, given the widespread reports of exploitation using the route, particularly within the care sector. So, to help us with all of that, we're very pleased to welcome the new Permanent Secretary of the Home Office, Dame Antonia Romeo, Permanent Secretary. Of course, we know you from your previous role as Permanent Secretary in Justice. I was sort of thinking, and I'm now going to say it, I'm not sure you haven't jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, but we shall see in due course. With you to support you, we're very pleased to have Simon Ridley, the second Permanent Secretary on the extreme right. Simon was the interim Permanent Secretary prior to Antonia Romeo taking up her role, and of course has appeared before this committee a number of times. Dan Hobbs, the Director General Migration and Borders Group. Dan became Director General for Migration and Borders Group in August 2023. And finally, but no means least, Marc Owen, CBE, Director for Visa Status and Information Services. And Marc is responsible for all the visit, work, study, family and settlement applications, and previously carried out a wide range of senior roles within the border, immigration and citizen services. So a particular warm welcome to you, Marc. It's your first time before the committee, I think. Well, I'm sure you will find the experience interesting. So very warm welcome. I'd also like to make everybody aware that there will be a 2-minute silence at 12 p.m. today to commemorate the 80th birthday anniversary of VE Day, at which point, or just before 12 o'clock, I will pause the committee briefly and will invite all those that are able to and wish to stand. I also have to leave just after noon, as I have another commitment, and my deputy, a very able deputy, Clive Betts, will then take the chair. And I understand the Permanent Secretary, you must also leave at 11:30 to go to the VE Day celebrations. So without any further ado, let's get into the session. I think, Permanent Secretary, hopefully you've been advised that I'm going to ask a question on the Treasury Minute on North Eye. And thank you for the Treasury Minute. I have to say it was a fairly hard-hitting report with fairly hard-hitting recommendations, and I thought that on the whole your department took a pretty realistic view on the whole thing, so I'm grateful for that. One or two things arising from that Treasury Minute. How satisfied are you that the new department has received a limited opinion from the Government Internal Audit Agency for the last 7 years?
So first of all, thank you very much for having me chair in this new role. Not at all satisfied. And I think it's clear that as an incoming Permanent Secretary, it's actually quite helpful to have a position where the GIAA has set out areas of concern in the control environment in the organisation, because it does help me identify some of the areas that I need to look. I should say that quite a lot of work has been done already on this in the department. I would say, arriving new, I'm in my 4th week, arriving new, there's quite good sort of down-the-line accountability through the Home Office operating system that my predecessor and with Simon put in place. There are clearly areas, as identified by the GIAA, where, particularly in terms of compliance, in terms of risk control, in terms of, I would say, joining up and perhaps linking what's happening in the business areas to the top strategic oversight of the department, where we need to go further. The GIAA also said that the prevailing control environment was weak. These are things that I have seen before in other organisations. I feel as though there's work to do, but as I say, I do think that a lot was done by Simon, my predecessor, in the whole of the ExCo to focus on this already. So we're not starting from standstill, but there's further to go.
Again, that's another realistic answer. Thank you very much for that. So the Treasury Minute, responding to our report on the North, suggests a degree of complacency about addressing a culture that has undervalued assurance and control. How will you strengthen the control environment within the Home Office?
I very much agree that these issues are cultural issues. So there's two things one needs to do. First is make sure that the right processes are in place. And as I say, I think we've got some quite strong processes in what we call down the line. The area where I am most focusing initially is how we are joining up that accountability to the conversations that are happening at the strategic level by the Executive Committee and the Board. I think there's further work to do there, and that is, in a way, a process issue. You can look at, it's about the risk registers, what is the flow through, how regularly are you meeting. I mean, we do have an Executive Committee strategic risk deep dive every quarter. We look at the risk register every month. That's not enough because, of course, it's in the culture. One thing I would say another thing about process that I have done that I felt was quite successful at the Ministry of Justice is ensure that every time ExCo meets formally, which is every fortnight, we are focusing on the single biggest risks in the department. So we always have an urgent business section where we're talking about the things that we are most concerned about, and the Directors General are sharing the information and the data. So everybody knows not just the thing they're worrying about in their area, but what we are worrying about collectively. So we've just started doing that, and I have found that useful in the past. In terms of culture, to change the culture, you've got to change the incentives. So insofar as and I think, again, in lots of areas we are very effective at risk management. I think there are some obvious areas in the Home Office where risk management is like the bread and butter of what is being done operationally and in terms of policy advice. The question is, how do you make it such that everybody feels incentivised to worry about compliance, to worry about assurance, to do the checks, to make sure they're flagging things up the chain? And that's going to be, that's the work of several months or maybe years, but I think we're already talking about it. And the more we are talking about it and the more we are putting in place the right processes and holding people to account for worrying about those things, the swifter we will see behaviours change. And I do hope we will get out of our limited internal assurance from the GIAA, in some period. I don't want to set myself a target, but soon, in a number of years, one hopes.
Well, I welcome that answer, and I suppose the proof of the pudding of the effectiveness of your reply will be how often you appear before this committee, so we shall see. Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just briefly, Dame Antonia, the Victims and Prisoners Bill that was passed just at the very end of the last Parliament included within it the putting on a statutory footing Operation Encompass, which is a requirement on police forces to inform schools if they have attended a domestic abuse incident and there are children involved. Concerns have been raised from an independent school in my constituency that the plans for the implementation do not fully involve independent schools at the moment, and I wonder if you could comment either directly now or perhaps as a follow-up on what the plans are to ensure that independent schools are fully involved in that implementation.
Well, I think with the committee's permission, it would be best to come back to you. We are, as you say, this is already in place, and it's where officers involved in a domestic abuse incident make sure that they feed it into the safeguarding lead at school so that appropriate action can be taken. Obviously, this works alongside existing statutory guidance that exists and covers all schools. So there's already something in place that does have universal coverage. But we are going to announce plans on commencement before recess in the VALK strategy. So I suggest I write to the committee at that point.
I'd be very grateful. Thank
really
you.
Helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
So we're now going to get into the main session, and we've already acknowledged, Permanent Secretary, you're only, as you say, 4 weeks into the job. You've got very able people here to support you. We are perfectly happy. If you answer any of the questions or if you wish to deflect, that's perfectly acceptable. So I have a first sort of slightly general question getting into the session. I'm sure you will all be aware that the Times has a big headline on its front page. All migrants will have to be fluent in English. So the question is, how will that how will that operate, and how will it operate particularly in relation to this scheme?
You'd expect me to say this, Chair, that any speculation about what might be in the immigration white paper, I think it wouldn't be appropriate to comment on. I would like to say that the immigration white paper, which aims to join up skills, immigration and the labour market requirements, so a very important way of thinking about immigration in the context of what is needed in the labour market, is going to be published shortly. So at that point, it might be better to give more detail on what you have just mentioned, should it be in the paper.
Okay, fair enough. Could you please... I'll get the right piece of paper in a minute. Sorry about this. There we are. I'm here. I think, again, Permanent Secretary, I'm very happy if you answer this, but it was really sort of designated down to Simon Ridley to answer this. How well has the skilled worker route been meeting its objectives since its introduction, as I've already said, in 2020?
Well, perhaps I'll say a couple of things, and then Simon will, as you rightly say, knows a lot more about it than me. But I would just say, observing, sort of seen strategically, the aims of the route were to have a fair and flexible visa system, which enabled the UK to attract skills it needed and support economic growth. And so I think it's fair to say it's a sort of been a mixed picture with a lot of those things achieved. There's no doubt it was flexible, and it's been used over the period to be flexible in a way that I think has been very successful. It obviously has been specifically used to target skills that were required, and I think it was successful in that. There are obviously areas, as we're going to come on to, as set out in the report, where there were things that might have been done differently, but I just think it's good to note at the start that this was implemented just before COVID. So there are a lot of things where I think we're going to find as a theme of the session that things that happened during the visa route changes that were made, things that one might expect to be done in peacetime, weren't done necessarily to the level that we might now want to be done. But let me hand over to Simon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. I agree absolutely with everything Antonia has said. I think I would, and as a sort of architecture, the skilled worker route has been important. We've been able to operate it consistently throughout, and as has been said, where there have been particular needs in the UK labour market, we have been able to adapt within that architecture to address pressures as they have arose. And I'm sure we will come to health and social care in particular later in this session, but that's obviously one of the kind of crucial ways in which we were able to respond quickly in 2022 to the acute needs in the care sector. I think there are some really important things we have learned over recent years, and that are part of the considerations at the moment, which relate to how we design new routes under the skilled worker route for particular sectors, and how we develop more sophisticated ways in which we work between the overall labour market needs of the country and the work that is being done in the Industrial Strategy Council and elsewhere, how we work with the Skills England and other parts of government, and how we work with DWP and other departments seeking to bring UK workers into the labour market and make sure that migration is feeding into what we need, looking at the labour market in the round in different sectors. And there's a lot of work we're doing with the MAC, we have done over the years and will continue to do, but there is more we can do to join that up across government, and that will ensure that where we are designing the specifics of particular ways in which an aspect of the immigration rules can work for particular routes, we are working off the very best shared analysis for the departments that are expert in particular sectors, and those sorts of things. But overall, the route has been successful post-Brexit as a construct. There's then a sort of separate debate which is much broader than the skilled worker route about net migration in the round, which has gone up very considerably over the last few years, and which the government is clear is too high, and a number of changes have already been made, and work is underway to continue to bring net migration numbers in the round down.
That's a really helpful answer, and we will be aiming to dissect bits of it, if not all of it, before we're finished. Just really a final opening question from me, perhaps to Dan Hobbs. What have you learnt from your evaluation of the route, which is due to be published this year?
So the evaluation will publish later this year, and obviously you wouldn't expect me to preempt that report at this moment, but I think it will look at kind of where we set salary thresholds, where the implementation of those things work, how we join up, and as both Simon and Antonia have said, is how we bring together much more clearly labour market strategies, the industrial strategy, our work with Skills England and the relevant bodies in the devolved nations to really understand how we can flex the system. It's also worth noting at the same time as we've been amending the system and delivering the skilled worker routes, there's been a significant transformation into how we deliver that service with things like e-visas and our transformation of the border and the modernisation of our digital systems, which has run alongside the delivery of the skilled worker visa.
So I'm glad you mentioned the devolved nations. We've had a letter from our colleague Claire Hanna, a Northern Ireland MP, quite detailed letter. I think rather than asking questions here, if I may send it to you, Permanent Secretary, and if you might just respond to her, I think would be really helpful.
Of course.
Anna Dixon, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and good morning. I should probably just briefly declare that I know Mr. Ridley from a leadership programme some years ago. It's very good to see you. So I'd just like to clarify with Mr. Hobbs, if I may, when was the evaluation that you just mentioned actually commissioned?
So I think it was commissioned earlier this year. Excuse me, I just need to check. But it was there was a post-implementation review done on certain elements in 2023. Right. And as I said, we are in the final stages of finalising the evaluation that will then be published, we expect, in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you. So obviously very significant changes were made to this in particular, and I'm sure we'll spend quite a bit of today's session on this, the inclusion of care workers in 2022, and then obviously further changes to eligibility requirements made again in spring of 2024. So I just want to really understand both what work was done to assess the impacts ahead of implementation and also to evaluate the impacts of such major changes to the routes. So I don't know if I come to you, Simon, perhaps just to say what impact assessment was done. The NAO report suggests that it didn't include things such as success criteria, evaluation plans, or even cover some of the very many compliance risks that have clearly crystallised since.
Yeah, so thank you very much indeed. There were a few things in there. So, I mean, if I start with the work that was done when the extension of the scheme into care workers was made in early 2022. So that work was done in the wake of the pandemic, when the care sector was under acute pressure, and DHSC and the government at the time were very concerned about vacancies and care worker, the workforce in care. There was a MAC report that we had commissioned late in 2021 that made the same points and talked to the acute need to temporarily develop the route to enable us to bring more care workers into the country. We worked with DHSC on what's the sort of scope and scale of that might be if we made the changes that we did, which was effectively to reduce the skills levels of the route. So we introduced two new job codes at RQF2, i.e. a skills level down to enable us to bring in care workers. At that point, we made those decisions, or the government of the day made those decisions quite quickly on the basis of that analysis, so that it came into force in February 2022. And as we've said, we were using the sort of flexibility of the skilled worker route architecture that we had. We have done a number of things in the time since then about the sort of expansion of that route, but it is right to say that the numbers that came through that route and the misuse of that route was on a larger scale than was anticipated at the time in early 2020, in early 2022. We have carried out, when we made the changes in 2023 that came into force in 2024, so those are the changes to dependents and those are the changes to salary thresholds. We published at the time an initial assessment of the likely impacts in late 2023. We did a larger impact assessment that was published last year, I think in September 2024. That work was done prior to September 24, but the government of the day did not choose to publish it, and we published it post-election in September.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. Might I add something about? I think that there's two types of thing that we might have done that we didn't do. And one cluster of those things is, I think, just because of the nature of it being in COVID, had we our time again, we would have ended up in the same position. And the other is things that maybe with lessons learned we might think about doing differently. In the first category, I would put the fact that we were expanding a model designed for skilled workers to a different area, a different demographic, and that led necessarily to some unexpected things happening, and that was because, as Simon has said, we had to do it because of the acute pressure we were under. I would also say the pace issue. Pace was absolutely the number one criterion at the time, and I think that was the position of the government. It was what the MAC was recommending. There are some areas, though, where with the lessons learned that we have been looked at, and as Dan and Simon have said, there will be an evaluation published, but with some of the things that we've already learned, I think we could have put more time limits, conditions, tests, gateways in, and perhaps if we were doing it again, while some of the things would have stayed the same, and I don't think we would necessarily have been able to do them differently, I think there were some areas where we could have done more tests, more conditions, and more things for example, safeguarding and compliance.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to come on to sort of what was done and whether it was done in a timely enough way to protect very vulnerable workers coming into this country with good intention and for good reason. There are nearly 2 million, I think it's 1.8 million workers in the care sector doing an amazing job every day looking after older and disabled adults. There was an issue with very large vacancy rates, and obviously the scheme to some extent has worked. Those vacancy rates are now down to 131,000 thereabouts. And international recruitment, figures suggest it went up from something like these are skills for care numbers, from about 15,000 in 2021 to 105,000 in 23-24. So clearly opening that opportunity did lead to a lot of people coming in, and since you've changed the salary thresholds and in particular not allowing workers to bring in dependents, international recruitment's now fallen back again. So my understanding is that in the quarter April-June 23 it was 26,000, that's down now to just 8,000. So it's very much you quickly turn this tap on, seen the problems, sort of turned it back off again. Now for the care sector and for those care workers who've come, this is obviously leading to quite a lot of problematic impacts. So I just wanted to follow up really and say, what is your own analysis of what the impact of these changes, both the turning on and the turning off of the tap, are to the labour market and the wider economy? Perhaps again start with you, Simon.
Yeah. So I mean, the first thing to say is that we have shown that we do have a flexible enough system to respond to very acute labour market needs. And the first thing we assess is that the scheme did work to exactly as you have laid out, bring a number of care workers into the system and into the country quickly and enable some of those gaps to be filled. It also shows that, seen in isolation, migration is a very blunt tool. And as I said, I think it's really important that we have the best sectoral workforce analysis and strategy that we can have that looks into the long run, that is getting the balance right between using the UK labour market, the skills pathways that we have, and migration where it is needed. Impact analysis that we have done shows the benefits of bringing workers, and particularly higher skilled workers, into the economy. There are different challenges in terms of pressures on other public services and housing, where there are very high numbers, and a lot of that is important to the wider net migration debate and overall sort of population position. I think the other thing that I would say is we have sort of learned a lot through the care worker route in particular about the propensity for people to try and take advantage of the route, both, and we've seen that with employers, and the care sector, as you know, is a particularly heterogeneous sector, which makes it easy for bad actors to essentially set themselves up to take advantage of people. We have seen facilitators sort of set themselves up to bring people in, and we have seen some evidence of trafficking through these routes, and we have seen individuals see the opportunity to come to the UK, not always with the intention of working in the care sector, but to make use of the route, and because there've been other they've had the ability to do that because of other bad actors in the system, and that has that's created a number of issues, which, as I say, we have learned a lot from, and we might come back to this, but from sort of summer 2022, we were identifying through the data we could see and the applications we could see things that were throwing some of these anomalies to light that we have then followed up as we've gone through, and we might come back to some of that. And then the final point to say is that once, and we're working very closely with DHSC, directors of social care and others on this, that once there are a large number of people in the country who, because their employer was not offering genuine roles, find themselves vulnerable in the UK, and we've done a lot of work to set up regional partnerships to try and match people into jobs so that we can kind of fill the vacancies in the best way. But
this understanding, I want to come specifically to the care labour market, because there are particular characteristics, as you're saying, of the care labour market, not least that these are quite low paid workers. I don't like to say low skill, because they are doing important and skilled work. Very easy for organisations to set themselves up initially. And many of these were agencies. They weren't even care providers. They were solely set up. A lot of unethical practice, which has obviously massively impacted the ethical providers in this sector, who were seeking to provide good working conditions. So in terms of it's all good to hear, and my own Director of Adult Social Services has provided me lots of information about how Yorkshire and Humber Hub is now up and running, and some of the way they're now trying to mop up the mess of these displaced workers who were brought over on false sort of pretences, and who found themselves effectively in modern slavery conditions, and trying to match them up now with more ethical providers. But going back to when this scheme was implemented, would you agree that insufficient engagement and understanding of the labour market in the care sector and the regional differences, that wasn't done, and hence some of the problems that we've seen?
So, we as I said, we work very we work very closely with DHSC. We the Home Office are not experts in the social care labour market. That is true. We made a set of decisions, exactly as Antonia said, very quickly in the wake of COVID because of the acute need in the sector, which the Migration Advisory Committee had also set out for us in late 2020-21 in their report, and in making the decisions that quickly, we did, there is definitely more we could have done to understand the way in which the care sector is structured and some of the risks that might have come about in setting up this route. It's also true. I completely agree with you about the sort of phraseology around low skilled. But the way we used the way we used the system was to open a route at a lower skill level, and that does, as well as the structure of the care market, that does enable a far wider number of people to find their way into the route or to be brought into the route by bad actors.
Yeah.
I'll just come in there.
Yes.
So, prospectively, when a department comes to you and says we'd like to open up a new route for a new group of workers, just very briefly talk us through the process. What probing questions do you ask? Because it does seem to me that, particularly in the care sector here, we're bringing in a whole load of very low-paid people, which is actually not necessarily benefiting our own people because it's keeping wages down. It's a huge cost in terms of immigration. So what really probing questions will you be asking future when a department comes to you and wants a new category?
So I think the first thing to say is in the past, we ask departments, a number of questions, particularly to try and understand the likely levels of demand through the route and what the sort of the numbers that they would expect the workforce would attract. We obviously ask questions about the sort of skill levels and the skill needs in order to make a set of decisions we need to design the sort of specifics of the immigration rules. I would say, and in the future, as I said, we can and need to do much more across government to have a kind of clear view of workforce strategies in critical workforces for the economy, to understand how that can be met in a number of different ways using the skills system in UK workforce, so that we've got so that migration is locked into that broader analysis before we make decisions about particular routes.
So specifically on this category, the care sector category, what work are you doing with the Department for Health so that feeds into their long-term health workforce plan to make sure that they are thinking about how to actually employ and train up Indigenous workers and hopefully provide a prospects for them?
Yeah, so the work we're doing with DHSC at the moment and Directors of Social Care, as I've said, in the main, is helping to support the people who've come in through this route. So we've tightened up the route in a number of ways in autumn 2023 that came into force last spring, and we are continuing to look at that with DHSC. And then crucially, we are working to support individuals. As we have revoked sponsor licenses for employers, that has left individuals without roles. There are also a number of people who've come into the country and found they didn't have a role, and a number of people who've come into the country with debts of various sorts because they have been taken advantage of. The work we're doing is mostly managing that at the moment. There is a lot of learning from the route, and that comes to the evaluation more broadly that Dan has talked to, which we are feeding into the thinking we're doing about how we do this across our migration routes and skilled workers more generally.
I think, Chair, there's one. Perhaps I can briefly add something on the forward plan. I think there's two different things here. The government's approach, this government's approach, is to be very focused on linking immigration and migration policy with the labour market and requirements and via the workforce strategies. So the Quad, as it's called, is a group of Skills England, the Industrial Strategy Council, DWP and the MAC, and they are going to be working closely together to come up with workforce plans and to scrutinise workforce plans, which will be the place that brings together the sort of issue you're identifying now. So if a department wanted a new route, you would expect that the Quad will be testing whether or not they've got a good workforce plan what that looks like and developing it, and Skills England will be heavily involved in that. That wasn't in existence at the time, and I think, bluntly, the position, and others will correct me if I'm wrong, was we had an acute need, there was a gap, there was a skilled work visa route that it was decided to use. In an ideal world, we would have set up a different route, because we do acknowledge this was a different demographic, as has been already noted. But that wasn't the world we were in. The world we were in is, what are we going to use to fill this gap? This is urgent, this is important, this is crucial to the country. The MAC recommended it, the government wanted to do it, so we worked to mitigate the risks as much as possible, but that was the absolute core priority at the time, and that's why we did it the way we did it.
Thank you very much. Anna, briefly, because we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, just briefly to illustrate this. So, I mean, for example, most of the shortage in care is in rural areas. It's domiciliary care. And yet that was not where most of the people were being brought to. So there's a complete mismatch both regionally and in the type of worker. So it means now that these revocations have happened, for example, the people who are left, they lack UK care experience, they don't have access to transportation, which means they don't have a UK driving licence, they have poor employability skills, poor communication and English language skills, and therefore we've brought in people that are not fit for the jobs that are needed. So, I mean, I'm reassured slightly by your view about how this is going to happen in the future. But even with the speed at which this was done, which is sort of the excuse being given post-COVID, there just seemed to be a real lack of very basic engagement with the care sector, with care providers, in order to understand the labour market dynamics that were already in existence.
And just to be clear, I totally recognise all of that. I'm not seeking to make excuses, actually. I'm seeking to recognise that, but I'm explaining why both the position was as it was, but also why, given the new focus, I don't think that would happen because of the new strategic focus. It doesn't mean that we don't still have an extant problem that you're describing with Dixon that we need to fix.
Thank you, Anna, very much. Sarah Hall. Sarah Green, please. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Too many Sarahs in the room. The number of people using the skilled worker visa route is much higher than expected. And Mr. Ridley, I'm curious to hear from you what you think this tells us about how the route is being used.
I mean, the big increases in the route are largely driven by the big increases in the health and social care worker route. So if we look at the numbers over the last few years, there's essentially a very big surge, mostly in 2023, particularly the latter half of 2023, of people coming through the health and social care route, and that speaks to some of the issues we've already covered as people came in. More broadly, we do see the persistent use of the route in some key sectors, and indeed we have commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee. The government has commissioned the Migration Advisory Committee to do to report on some key sectors, including IT and engineering, and they'll be reporting later in the year, so that we have got a greater level of evidence of those sectors that use the route the most, that we can feed in precisely into the process that Antonia has laid out, so that all different parts of government can have a kind of the deepest shared analysis of different workforces that we can bring together.
And can I also ask what actions are departments taking to address some of the unintended consequences and unintended outcomes? So, for example, the increase in asylum claims from those using the route.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, you're right to point out that there's been that there has been an increase in applications into asylum for people using the skilled worker route. There are a number of important things that we do and that we will. That we need to add to. So the first thing to say is that to come in on the skilled worker route, there is a requirement to be able to demonstrate that you can support yourself at the beginning. There is a requirement to demonstrate that you've got a genuine role come to, as we have described, particularly in the case of the new social care route. Some of that, particularly around genuine vacancies and genuine roles to come to, broke down somewhat. So there is a lot we have done to tighten that up, and we will continue to do. We are then also working very closely with individual countries where there is a higher prevalence to be coming into the asylum system, to make sure that we can, where we're not granting asylum, effect very quick returns and make sure that the system is working as effectively as possible.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Sarah agreed. Well done, thank you. Chris Caton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to talk first about paragraphs 2.4 and 2.9 of the report. I'll just read you a couple of lines. This is 2.4. In considering entry requirements in the skilled worker visa route, the Home Office must balance government immigration policy with the priorities of other departments and the route's objective to enable employers to recruit the skilled workers they need. Paragraph 2.9. There are inevitably tensions where Home Office objectives to reduce net migration come into conflict with differing objectives and priorities of other departments. Despite this, other departments' feedbacks on the extent of consultation has been mixed, with concerns that impacts of real changes in the department's plans are not sufficiently considered. So I wonder if I can ask Antonia, what are you doing to ensure that collaboration with government departments and changes to rules with skilled worker visas are as effective as possible? And we have concentrated on the care sector so far, so what do you maybe talk about that in other areas?
Great. So, thanks for the question, because this committee knows I always like the opportunity to talk about cross-government collaboration. I do think there has been a lot of good informal collaboration, and actually, as Simon's already described, we work very closely with DHSC in setting up the route. Indeed, we were using their modelling a lot of the time in terms of predicting things as well as our own. What I do think is that we need to formalise some of that cross-government working at official level. So obviously there are cabinet committees that exist. There are the usual processes for agreement to policies. So nothing should actually be launched without that level of agreement. But in order to get the official level join up really smooth, I think we're looking at ways we can do this, and this committee will know about, for example, on the CJS side, the Criminal Justice Action Group that I think has been very effective. I think we need to be looking at in areas where the Home Office needs to work most closely with other departments, including the one you described, putting in place some more formal processes. The aforementioned so-called Quad is obviously a place where this is going to come together, because it is deliberately designed to bring together essentially the Industrial Strategy Council, so DBT, Skills England, DFE, DWP, and then the MAC as connected to migration and the Home Office. So it's a place where we should get a good picture, because this government's approach to reduce net migration, but also to encourage investment in the UK workforce and to boost skills and training and to grow the economy, to do those things is a whole of government effort. So I think both the Quad is going to help do that at a kind of strategic level, but also we are looking at how we are going to formalise some of those official level systems, because in my experience, relying on informal connections gets you so far. And I think actually, I should say that the people at the Home Office, I think, are brilliant and dedicated and highly committed and working really hard across government. But sometimes if you don't have a formalised process, things can fall between the gaps.
Recognising how new into the job you are, and I'm not looking for a date, can you maybe give us an indication of how long you think it will take to get these processes in place? Well,
so I think, again, it's not a kind of flash to bang immediately. I think that we'll start. The Quad, once the immigration white paper is published shortly, there'll be, as it were, the policy proposals to take forward, and then what the system will do is to set up the processes that are required to take those forward across government. So we are already working out what that might look like. There are quite a lot of, Dan might want to comment, but there's a lot of things already that we do across government. My own view is, just from my experience, it's better when you've made them a bit more formal, they meet regularly. It's not all about the meeting, but you know who's responsible for what and who's accountable and how it's coming together. So I think we're just looking at how we might formalise that. I'd expect that to be done in a matter of months, although I'm not suggesting that then there'll be no problems ever in the future, but I think we can try and get those processes and those systems and those structures in place in a matter of months. But if I may, I might bring in Dan.
Just to add, my team and I discuss extensively with lots of our colleagues across government and equally with the business sector. So I've at least attended 3 roundtables with the cross sections of users of our system, both as sponsors and recruiters. The mission-led government approach also means there are some formal structures around some of the key government priorities, of which I sit on a number of official level groups that then feed into the ministerial groups on things like housing, on skills, on the growth agenda. So there are formal mechanisms of which migration plays a part, and as both Simon and Antonia have explained, there is a clear ministerial intention to bring together Skills England and the devolved nations with the MAC and with DWP to really think about what role migration plays in supporting those agendas, but migration not necessarily being the sole lever that we pull to solve labour market challenges.
Thank you both for that. Can I now move on to paragraph 2.10 of the report? This is the government's announced plans in July to develop closer links between immigration policy and sectoral labour market policies, with all of the intentions listed in that paragraph. I wonder, perhaps this is for Simon, how will improving the links between immigration policy and labour market policies improve the ways that you assess the potential impact of future changes to visa rules?
Yeah. So I think the short answer to that, and happy to add to it, is we want to bring together the analysis that these different bodies do from their different perspectives on particular workforces around sectoral workforce strategies. So there's a really clear view, whether it's for social care, engineering, construction, or anything else, that the department or body responsible for that workforce has a kind of clear workforce strategy in terms of the demand on that sector and what we think we need in terms of labour market, and that is. There's then a shared analysis between the different bodies of what can be met to what timescales through skills pathways, what the options are, what the opportunities are in the UK labour market in terms of bringing people into the workforce, and if we need a new or different migration route, how that would add into it. So there's a much deeper shared evidence base on which, in the case of migration, the Home Secretary can then go on and make the decisions that she may need to.
I might come in here, Simon Ridley, if I may. It's not clear to me how this route works for the different devolved nations. So the letter that I referred to from our colleague in Northern Ireland, clearly there are distinct skilled shortages in Northern Ireland and may well be in Scotland, I don't know. Yes. How are you able to differentiate between different devolved parts of this nation?
Yeah. So it's a really important question, Chair, because as you say, different parts of the system that I've described, some are UK-wide, migration, some are devolved in terms of skills. So when I'm talking about Skills England, and I apologise, it's really a shorthand for making sure that we can sort of draw in the skills needs and the opportunities in other parts of the UK. I realise
skills is devolved, but immigration is not.
No.
And therefore this route, I'm really asking how you can vary it for different parts of the devolved nation.
Sorry, do you mean the social care route in particular, or the skilled workers route?
The whole system, really, the whole skilled worker visa system, because it won't just apply to care workers, it'll apply to other skills as well.
Sorry, Dan, do you want to?
So obviously the MAC are an important role in advising and doing the labour market analysis, and as part of that they do take into account and have looked at the issues around salary levels, for example, in different regions of the United Kingdom, including the devolved nations, and advise on that. And there are examples where we have used, for example, on the immigration salary list, there are specific flexibilities that are afforded to certain industries, particularly in reflecting the needs of Scotland on fishing. So there is an ability, as there has been with the creation of the adult social care elements of the skilled worker, is to be able to flex it to either allow certain levels below RQF 3 to 5 to be enabled under the system, or by adjusting the salary thresholds in that regard. So often it is done on the advice and the input, and the government meets regularly with the devolved nations. The Home Secretary and the ministers have had various roundtables and discussions with their counterparts, and the MAC do take into consideration when it does its call for evidence on sectoral analysis, and when they did their review of what was previously the shortage occupation list. The government then decided on the basis of its own analysis and feedback from departments and others is that it would actually maintain the exemption for the fishing industry, as one example, where it was bespoke for a certain region.
So I'm sorry to interrupt there. Hopefully I've helped your...
No, you have. Very happy to ask a few questions about the approach to this. Listening to what you're saying, I think probably what I would suggest on the devolved nature, whilst recognising that any variations is a government decision, if that were to be the case, can you give me the assurance that in terms of collecting the data and engaging with the devolved nations, that you have and continue to have an up-to-date picture on where the shortages are? I would hate to think that there's a difference between the connections in England and the connections in the devolved nations to understand a granular level of what is required. So
we continue, as I said, to both collect the evidence when the MAC does its report, and we have our connections in, so I can assure you that is taken into account. But obviously we operate an immigration system, as the Chair said, that covers the whole of the United Kingdom.
I think what I'm trying to ascertain is the interface between immigration and skills in England is, when I look at that integration in the devolved nations, I just want an assurance that the policies and the procedures, and Antonia, all of the changes that you've suggested to get the data and get an assurance, these structures will be as strong with the devolved nations so that you do have a UK-wide picture and not a better understanding of what's happening in England.
So the intention is that the Quad will work very closely with the devolved nations, and also I mentioned that the Industrial Strategy Council is part of it, and of course that is looking widely, including with the devolved nations, about skills requirements, about investment, about business across the whole piece. So that I expect that will be where it comes together, and perhaps we could. I think there'll be more on this in the immigration white paper. Will help shed light on how the policy is going to work in practice.
Okay. In paragraph 2.10, it says what the government's doing is launching Skills England, a new arm's length body to form a coherent picture of skills gaps across the United Kingdom. Is that correct? It's Skills England's job to form a cohesive UK picture.
So, as the Permanent Secretary has said, the view in terms of how the Quad will work is it's Skills England and its respective counterpart organisations in the devolved nations that will form part of building that collective evidence base to understand the dynamics of those labour markets and its link to industrial strategy. So it is intended that both the MAC, DWP, Skills England and respective counterparts in the devolved nations would be part of that shared evidence base, which would then inform the development of migration policy.
I'm going to push this just one more time, because it's important, because words matter. So when I'm reading Skills England are responsible for a coherent picture of skills gaps across the United Kingdom, it can be perceived as a tone-deaf name.
Yep.
If it's Skills England for what really is Skills UK. So I just want to make sure that
So I think this refers to the manifesto commitment of the government to establish the body called Skills England, as you say, reflecting England. It does not mean that we would not take in the evidence from the respective organisations in the devolved nations as part of the Quad. So I think there is a point here that Skills England can obviously only by nature, because it's devolved, cover England, not the entirety of the UK.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the clarification. Can I just moving on slightly? My constituency, Stirling University, like all universities, are finding a negative impact of our policies and the desire to attract the best PhD students and researchers. And given how much value we place in this country in skills and innovations and our universities, are we engaging with universities to understand the impact? It's not just departments, universities as well.
In terms of the wider immigration system and the operation of international students and graduates, yes, we talk both with the Department for Education and the respective bodies in the devolved administrations and the university bodies. The skilled worker route already has salary flexibility for those who are under 26, who are new entrants in, and people who have PhDs. So in terms of the flow through, and obviously we have the graduate route visa that supports us retaining highly skilled students who remain in the UK after their studies. So there are flexibilities, as I say, particularly for PhD students switching into the skilled worker route.
If it's useful feedback to hear, I am getting a lot of frustrated researchers and professors at universities who are saying that it's not working for them. That their frustration is palpable when they're writing to me. But thank you for that. I don't, Antonia, you look like you want to say something, or?
Well, I was just going to say that obviously we're responsible for immigration policy in the Home Office, and there's but some of the conversations that we'll be having with DFE, and then we need to work. This is why it's a whole of government approach, because we've got to make sure that every sector, so the university sector, individuals in that sector, but also all the other sectors also are their views should feed in and be represented, and that's part of why we need a workforce strategy, different workforce strategies across the sectors. So I think I wouldn't want to give the impression that we thought we were the people doing all the liaison with all of those sectors, because that's why we've got this quad, which does, by the way, specifically to address your previous point, Mr. Kane, specifically has a remit to work with the devolved nations as well. So that's why the quad will bring it together. So we will be having a lot of those conversations ourselves, but also we're not just relying on those conversations, because there'll be other departments who are in the lead for certain sectors who will be feeding in and producing the workforce strategies to which the MAC will then be considering and giving recommendations on immigration policy.
Thank you. I finally ask about paragraph 1.11 on the report. This is about the additional charges that are levied. There's a section on the immigration skills charge where it says DFE does not directly receive this income, so it's unclear how the money is allocated by HM Treasury or spent. I don't know who wants to take this one, but perhaps Marc, what are you doing to ensure that the immigration skills surcharge paid by sponsors is being used for its intended purposes?
Well, look, I mean, Marc might want to say something, but perhaps I should, as Principal Accounting Officer, say this is rather above my pay grade, because the question is this surcharge arrives and then it's paid into the consolidated fund, and then the way in which it is then distributed or used to which department for what is essentially a matter for the Treasury in that department. So I think unless Marc may well have lots of other things to say.
Well, if it's above Antonia's pay grade, it's probably above mine as well.
Then let me ask it this way. Is there a curiosity being expressed by your department to what is happening with this, and are you engaging with the Treasury to get a better understanding of it?
We definitely, a big part of the plan and the government's approach is that immigration is not used as a way to solve these gaps. The way to solve the gaps is to train up the UK workforce, and that investment and the surcharge is designed to bring money in to support that investment. But again, the way in which that happens, the negotiations between the department who would actually be funding that investment and the Treasury coffers where it's held, I think that isn't something that we would get involved in, but we're very enthusiastic, obviously, because we're trying to lower net migration and for many other reasons, including why about growth in the economy. We're very enthusiastic that funding should be used to invest in UK skills building, and the matter of which the flows of funding that will allow that to happen are, I think, beyond the remit of
so I think what we need to take this up with either Treasury or DFE, so we can use another forum in this committee, I think, to question what your
that was my final point. I have just one final point, and then I'll hand back. In my constituency, Camp Hill at Blair Drummond is a remarkable residential service for people with learning disabilities, and they attract volunteers from all over the world to work with residents. But what they're reporting to me is that the high increase in, for example, the health surcharge is limiting who they are able to attract as volunteers. I recognise we've got skilled workers, but volunteering is a sort of subset of skilled workers, and international volunteering seems to be being caught up in this. I'm just wondering, is volunteering something that registers on the thinking of the department when it's with this? When it's thinking about
well,
this?
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not aware that volunteers pay the immigration health surcharge. Obviously, a skilled worker is expected to be employed if they're on a skilled worker temporary visa, and that their prime purpose of being in the UK is linked to their sponsorship, which does attract a number of fees, including the immigration health surcharge. But we'll have to look into that specific issue.
Thank you. I can write you that, but certainly they are being caught up, and that is what they're reporting to me, that the health surcharge is causing problems.
Although the health surcharge is paid by the individual, not the employer.
It's the concept of the impact it's having on volunteering, and I think volunteering is something we would all hope is something that helps build the skilled workers of the future, because it's something that they do almost prior to them becoming the skilled workers we want in 10 years' time. So I'll happily take that up.
Thank you very much, Chris. Very helpful. Marc, you've been very patient sitting there. Hopefully this question comes within your remit. If not, some of our witnesses beside you will probably be able to help. And it's this. Notwithstanding what the Permanent Secretary said about changes to the rules on English, the current rules on English, you had a contract with Extis, a third-party provider, to carry out assessments and issue statements that can be used as part of the application. But previously, Extis kept all the money for these services, but now you've decided that you're going to regulate this area. So why did it take you so long to realise that the Home Office was not regulating the fees for services provided by Extis?
Yeah, so thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. My name is Marc, and I'm Director for UK Visas and Immigration, is our public brand, as it were, so I'm very proud to lead those teams in the Home Office. Extis provide for the Home Office, and have done since 2007 under their former sort of name, UK NARIC as well, qualification equivalency and English language equivalency services for customers. So to a question you'd asked before about English language testing, you can either go and get an English language test as part of your visa application, or if you've studied a degree in English, Extis would say, well, that was done at a sufficiently high level that you don't need to go and get an English language test. And that has operated as a kind of concession, so it was kind of sort of a contractual arrangement with Extis since 2007. So they basically would provide that service to customers. Customers would pay Extis for that service, and they would then prove that to the Home Office as part of the visa application. We, as part of re-procuring that service in 2024, we got advice that because the service was a necessary or compulsory part of the customer journey, it needed to be, the fee for that service needed to be regulated, which is something that we then did in December 24. So we regulated the fee for new applicants under the old contract. The new contract went into live service last week, 1st of May, also with the regulated fee. And then currently through the Border Security and Asylum Migration Bill, we are, as it were, rectifying the statutory basis of the fee collection under Extis under the old contract, so backdating it, as it were. So we took action as soon as we had advice that the fee should have been regulated. We didn't have that advice beforehand, and that's why we didn't do it beforehand. But as soon as we recognised we needed to act, we did.
That's very straightforward. Thank you very much. Clive Betts.
Yes. It's been explained to us that when this scheme started, there was an urgency, mainly driven by COVID and the challenge in the social care sector. So the scheme was sort of fitted into an existing framework. There didn't then seem to be a curiosity about if that was what was happening and it wasn't a perfect system that was being designed from scratch, that there may be people there who would seek to exploit loopholes and flaws in the system. Is that a fair comment?
I mean, I can answer that if you like. So the again, I think you're referring to the inclusion of adult social care within the broader health care visa. That happened in February 22. There's lots of other things going on in February 22 as well. So Russia invaded Ukraine on February 28th, and we were then busy launching the Ukraine Family Scheme and then the Homes for Ukraine scheme. So actually with Simon overseeing that as well, we were right in the middle of Ukraine. So for a number of weeks, we had all my staff were basically processing Ukraine visas, not any other visas. When we turned to really processing a lot of the care worker visas in that spring period 2022, I think we pretty swiftly identified that there were significant issues in terms of just the volume of visa applications linked to individual sponsors, which seemed to exceed their capacity to employ them. So that triggered an operation which Simon referred to earlier called whose name was Operation Rassant, which ran from July 22 through to December 22, and that was targeting, as it were, the discrepancy where the data showed that the number of visa applications per sponsor seemed to be disproportionate. And one reason for that is the kind of compliance issues that have been referred to before, but I think there's also a kind of deep-seated and sort of structural issue which we uncovered. We didn't know before because we didn't have any experience of dealing with care within the immigration system. So unlike lots of other sectors where we've been working with them for decades, we never really worked with care providers. And one of the real issues, and Ms. Dixon, you touched on it in terms of domiciliary care, particularly, was I think the nature of how that is contracted by local authorities. Yes. So because local authorities contract for domiciliary care on the basis that they expect the care provider to be able to have sufficient workers to meet that contract, and then also to be able to respond to changes to that contract depending on how many people are being released from hospital, that meant that care providers were recruiting either speculatively to try and win those contracts, or more than they needed to in order to be able to service those contracts, and basically bringing people in for whom they didn't have guaranteed work. There's an interesting reference, I think, in paragraph 3.6 of the report, which says, however, stakeholders from the care sector reported that the Home Office's use of the test, that's the genuine vacancy test we introduced we strengthened the use of in August 23, does not always reflect the way that recruitment works in the sector, as it requires them to prove they have a vacancy at the time of application, which does not always suit the way that care is commissioned or how care providers recruit staff in that sector. But that's exactly the point of the skilled worker route, is that you have to have a vacancy in order to bring somebody to the UK to work under the skilled worker route. So I think that, plus meant that a lot more people came than were expected, even genuine care providers, not necessarily abusive ones, plus people were able to bring their dependents, which led to, I think, one, the volumes, and then two, people then finding themselves in the UK working for care providers which hadn't won contracts and or didn't have guarantees of work from week to week. So I think that's a fundamental structural issue in terms of how the care sector and the immigration sector don't really work well together in terms of how the labour market operates. Over and above that, there's all the other issues that were referred to in terms of genuine providers, agents stepping in, people exploiting people, migrants seeing it's an easy way into the UK, and so on. But I just thought I'd want to make that point for the committee, because I think there's a learning for us collectively about, for the Quad and others, how we're going to be able to manage this, which is quite complicated. Issue.
A substantially flawed system, then.
So I think if I may, I mean, the work we did at the beginning and the way we set the system up, there is, as we covered earlier, definitely more, if we had our time again, that we had our time again and had more time, as Antonia said earlier, we could have done more to kind of understand how the structure we used in order to set up the route quickly might have generated some of the challenges that we saw with respect to care that Marc has just has just outlined. I think after the event, to your initial question, we started to see anomalies. We started to see very quickly things in the data, and actually we were very curious about those. And we did the work that Marc has described, where we saw anomalous numbers of workers being recruited to relatively small organisations. We started doing intentions testing at the border through border force officers. So, but that was after the initial launching of the route.
On top of all these problems.
Well, as Simon was saying, we did a lot of that work through 22 and early 23. We were raising the issues with policy colleagues, with DHSC and others, and there were two substantive changes took place in August 23. So one was the more rigorous application of the genuine vacancy test. So that's at the issue of certificate of sponsorship stage by sponsors, where we were then scrutinising that indeed the employer did have guaranteed work for people, and many care providers struggled and have struggled to show that, despite there being vacancies partly as a result of the nature of the contracting of care, which I've referred to. We also introduced a genuineness test at the migrant application stage so that we could better scrutinise the intentions of migrants. And if you look at the overarching arc of numbers in terms of entry clearance, so that's the initial visa to come to the UK, that dropped quite considerably from August 23, where we started applying those.
In 2024, that seems he's been in operation for 2 years. You only check 1% of sponsors. It doesn't sound like a system that you know now is failing in many respects is then getting the degree of scrutiny it ought to have.
Well, perhaps I'll say something first, and then Marc will can give some more detail. I mean, the first thing to say is I don't think this is a story of lack of curiosity. I think it's a story of new and actually, and innovative and problem-solving. A thing was put in place that we knew, as has been acknowledged. It was a new demographic. It was different. There were reasons why we did it the way we did it at the time. There was a huge amount of work. I mean, I might take the opportunity just very briefly to pay tribute to the people in Marc's team and elsewhere across the department who have done this work, because it's been absolutely extraordinary to do that while doing to be diverted onto other routes following the invasion of Ukraine. So a huge amount going on, and a huge workload, and tackling the follow-up for COVID. I will be speedy. Issues were identified and amendments and improvements being put in place, including the genuine vacancy test and the genuineness test. I don't think we're saying we're on top of all the problems. I think we're saying we are identifying problems and putting in place within the resources that we have to fix those problems.
Why are only 1% of sponsors in 2024 being checked?
So we've totally overhauled the way in which we've done a lot of compliance activity. So one, we had a lot of work at record levels of net migration, also mean record levels of visas that we need to process, and we successfully, and the NAO report both compliments us on our ability to have done that and to take compliance action, and we've overhauled our compliance action. So we introduced digital compliance audits pre-license, so that massively expanded the number of digital audits. So that means basically a Teams interview, booked Teams interview, rather than sending a team round to see people, which expanded things. We established a work services risk hub, which basically has been taking on all the referrals activity we've had from a range of different sources, triaging them and carrying out compliance checks.
Can you answer the question I keep asking?
Well, the 1% refers specifically to checks which resulted in compliance action being taken as opposed to compliance action being done, as it were. So there was I would say there was a wider range of action that we were taking in terms of digital audits, in terms of triage, in terms of analysis of data. We use we have the important thing is that you're targeting your resources on the people who are riskiest and needing it most. So our work services hub does triage cases in that way. So we'd be going after people who are clearly trafficking or exploiting migrant workers or facilitating immigration with no purposes to be in care more than regulatory issues. So that would also triage.
Is 1% sufficient?
Well, in a way, 1% is the output, not the input, because 1% isn't the number being looked at. It's the ones who, following the initial review, 1% are then further actions being taken. So it's a sort of, whether or not it's sufficient is, it's more about the question of how many are you looking at, out of which 1% are then further action taken.
There are also further safeguards that we announced in 2023, which is requiring sponsors to be Care Quality Commission registered. So again, in terms of being able to sponsor, there are other things, as Marc has alluded to, that go through the process that mean that we have tightened the ability for sponsors, and then the ongoing overhaul that Marc talked about in us being able to verify those cases.
Right. Well, what about the ones who've already got through? The sponsors you've accepted in the past, and you accept that there's some pretty unacceptable behaviour, people taking advantage of the system. How far are you now removing some of those as sponsors?
So, I mean, in the care sector, between July 22 and December 24, we've revoked the licences of 470 care providers.
Out of how many?
Out of how many within the care sector?
How many were there as sponsors, and how many with licences, and how many of those licences were the 470 related to?
So, but while Marc's finding that figure, the other thing to say is that the number of revoked sponsor licences has gone up dramatically since we've been doing this additional work. So in 2023, we revoked 336 sponsor licences, and in 2024, we revoked 1,514 overall in the year. So it's answering a different question, but the point is that we are getting much tighter, and then there's also a question of how many we're approving in the first place, which has also gone down significantly. Marc?
Yes, we're just trying to get the figure of total number of care sponsors. One of the issues in the data is you've got health and care visa, and then you've got care within it. So disaggregating the two takes a little bit of time. We'll just get it for you and try and come back to you with that figure of, as it were, the proportion, which is what you're asking for.
So you're saying you're revoking licenses of people, you're doing more checks on existing sponsors. What happens to the workers at the end of that process?
What was the process? Do you want to?
So, yeah, I mean, this is where we're. So let me actually answer in two steps. So from a purely migration point of view, and the way we operate in lots of the routes is the point at which an individual loses the employment that they previously had. We would revoke their visa, which is on the basis of that job. We inform the individual. Typically, they have 60 days to either regularise their status by applying for a new visa in new circumstances, or at the end of that period, they leave the country. In the care sector, we've taken a very different approach because of the ongoing concern that DHSC and Directors of Social Care had about the sector. We work very closely with the department, and there are now 15 regional hubs that have been set up with money from health set up locally in 15 areas, and we are directing individuals who lose their employment because of a revoked sponsor licence towards those hubs. And those hubs, the care sector, is seeking to rematch people into roles. That is not run. That is neither funded nor run by us, but we are supporting it through referrals.
Do you have concerns that some of those workers may end up in the illegal arrangements, illegal working, under pressure?
So there is a risk of.
Is there any checks on that?
There is certainly a risk of that.
Well, so there's wider compliance checks that every employer is expected to do when they are employing someone.
I know, but these are people who are not going to do the checks because they're not working legally.
No, so it's the employer that is required to do the check before they employ someone. So that's part of our standard compliance measures, that they are required to use the employee checking service. and under our colleagues in immigration enforcement on a targeted intelligence basis do a whole range of work to combat illegal working in the UK.
And you said that the end of this process, workers may leave the country. How would you know if they've left the country?
The only way we can know if people have left the country is we use passenger information data to match various things internally. But people in the country on a visa are kind of clearly free to move around. They are not people who are monitored by us as we do that. I mean, what
explain that statement, passenger information.
So the only way the way we can tell whether people are in the country or not is to match the data we've got on the individuals that they give us when they apply for a visa with data that we get internally in terms of people using the airlines to leave the country.
Is that systematically checked and cross-referenced?
Well, we use it in a number of different ways. I mean, just to come back to the question on the care route, the first thing we are seeking to do is to maximise the opportunities for the people who have come in through this route to work in the care sector, where there remain a number of vacancies. We are directing people to the regional hubs where the care sector can then rematch them. Where people apply into new visa routes, we then process that as quickly as we can to support that transition and to make it as effective as possible.
I ask the question again. When people leave the country, you say you've got information from the airlines and others. Is that systematically kept, cross-referenced, checked against the information you have about people who've come here?
So we aren't tracking every single individual who comes into the country. So
here or not, that's a reality. If they haven't gone through your systems, they're just here. They're in the black economy. That's the problem.
Individuals have come in on a visa, and we have taken their information as they've come in into a visa. There are a set of clear immigration rules around that visa. If people try to work illegally, there are a set of right to work checks that employers can do and are expected to do digitally and very, very quickly. We know that, of course, there are people working illegally in the country, and that is where, as Dan has said, we use our immigration enforcement services to visit illegal working places on the basis of intelligence and to collect people and to return them as they can. You know, of course, that doesn't mean that there are people working illegally, and we are seeking to manage this system as best we can.
I just don't understand why there aren't cross-reference checks about whether people have left. If they've come in and they're not working legally, and you haven't got a reference record they've left, then they're probably legally working somewhere, isn't it? But that you haven't got that information. I mean, most countries actually check you out through their border control systems and take a record of people who come into the country and those that go out. You don't do that, do you?
So there's a lot that we are doing to try to transform our border security systems and to make sure they are as digital as they can be, and we can do as many checks as we can. There is absolutely scope to strengthen that. We've brought in e-visas, so people have a digital status that they can check and we can check much more easily. And we will continue to develop and transform that system. But there is definitely more we can do to continue to strengthen border security, and we have a lot of that work underway.
You're asking in a way, Mr. Betts, about what we're doing about visa overstayers, and the whole point is there's a lot of work that we're doing to identify and crack down on that. And we obviously work with a lot of other agencies as well who've got a role. So HMRC, for example, we work with local authorities. So there's a lot of joint working to try and identify the issue. We're not saying it's been solved. We're saying we're working to identify the issues where they arise and to fix them. But this is a problem. I mean, there's no doubt that this is a problem. We are now fixing a problem that was created for reasons we've already discussed in this session, and we're putting in place those fixes, and we've got some things that have already been set out that we think are working well, and there's still some territory still to go.
I mean, for care workers, we haven't been cancelling their visas since late 23. We've deliberately been working with DHSE on the reach matching process. So basically, allowing supplementary work and trying to rematch people into genuine care providers as a means of them not being driven into illegal working or into claiming asylum. And just to answer your previous question, you asked about the total number of sponsors in adult social care. So it's approximately 9,000.
That's about 5% then, where you revoked the sponsorship. Yeah.
Well, your figure was it an annual figure, Marc?
It was 470 care sponsors revoked between July 22 and December 24.
So it's 6 months.
And there are currently about 9,000
so it's
sponsors in care.
on an annual basis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a different time period but for those two stats, but it's approximately that kind of range, yes.
The Chair, I think Anna wants to follow.
I would just like to get one question, because I know the Permanent Secretary's got to go. It may be, I mean, obviously, clearly, paragraphs 3.18, 3.19, and 320 give more information on this sponsorship compliance checks. But it may be, Marc and the Permanent Secretary, you might want to write to us if you want to clarify this whole area. I'd be more than happy to do that.
In terms of what we're doing to improve non-compliance, improve the checks and so on. I mean, we've got a lot of work underway, so if helpful to the committee to set it out.
That would be really helpful, yeah. And you've only got 46 full-time equivalent FTE compliance officers compared to 65 in 21.
Well, I can pick that up now because we're using digital and technological solutions much more now. So we're actually trying, because of course, overall, I haven't had the chance to do a full riff on the department, but one of the things we've got to do to become more productive and agile is actually to use technology more effectively. So that, I think, is something naturally you would see as we get better about using tech and
that AI. Was going to be my final parting question before you left. How long do you think this transformation of the sponsorship system will take, and how long will it take to update the IT systems to go with that?
To go with the new...
Whatever you do in your transformation, you're going to...
Overall?
Yes.
In the department as a whole?
Yeah.
Or you're talking about the sponsorship issue in particular?
Overall, perhaps before you go, perhaps address two of those issues, the sponsorship and overall, because I think the IT systems are critical to the whole thing.
So the first thing to say about IT and technology is that what I have observed in the Home Office is there is a huge amount of absolutely exceptional innovation happening across the piece. So, I mean, our e-gates, e-visas, ETAs, everything, different type of E, everything that we're doing, but including we're doing hyper-local criminal crime concentration mapping. We're working with DCIT and UKRI on. So there's a lot of really excellent work happening on technology and innovation. I do think that one of the things that I'm keen we do as the Home Office is we talk more about it and we learn the lessons and we roll it out more. But there's a lot of really great work happening, including in this space. We do have a lot of tech debt as a whole. We have the Home Office done a brilliant job of reducing tech debt. It was about $1 billion in the last spending review period. We've now got it down to below 600 million. That is still a lot of tech debt to be carrying. We don't have as many legacy systems as I'm used to in my previous department, but we still have some of those, and they are very crucial systems, and when you're reliant on legacy systems, it's a problem. So I say that to offer a sort of caveat to how quickly we can get the new IT systems in place, which is IT systems always take longer than you think they're going to. Marc might want to say what we're specifically doing on technology in this space. But I would just caveat that we are working with you can't immediately leap to the new WYSI system. And what I think we need to do is to fix some of the basics first, and then we can employ the new, more innovative AI tools and other tech tools over the top, which we really want to do, and which will actually solve some of the problems in due course that Mr. Betts was identifying. But for now, I think we don't have all the basic infrastructure in place. So I think this is I think it's sort of a bit of a medium haul, unfortunately. But over to Marc.
So, I mean, the sponsorship...
Conscious, Marc.
Yes, please.
Your Permanent Secretary's got to go any second. What I think we're going to do is, thank you very much, Permanent Secretary. I think we will take a break for 5 minutes here now and be back at 11:35, and then we will pick up with Anna and pick up some of these points. But thank you very much, Permanent Secretary.
Thank you very
It's 11:35, so I'm going to resume order. We shall start broadcasting. Yeah. Right, we'll resume. Order. I just wanted to, Marc, I'm sorry, you were rather cut off in your prime there. We would like to hear what this committee is very keen on IT systems and anything you want to add to what you were about to say.
Yeah, so our sponsorship IT system dates back to 2008 when sponsorship went live and is what in jargon terms is known as tech debt and kind of old and clunky and not really as good as it could be. So we've been looking to modernise that for some time, and as the NAO pointed out in their report, there have been some delays to the sponsorship IT transformation. That's mainly been as a result of just the sheer amount of transformation going on in the Home Office and prioritisation decisions we've had to make, either, for example, in launching the Ukraine routes or prioritising other things such as e-visas and so on. We have started releasing elements of it, which is good. So in jargony terms, kind of private betas around elements of the new sponsorship IT system, and we hope that will continue over the next 2 or 3 years and mean that both my staff but also employers and educational institutions will get a much better service. On sponsor compliance, which we were touching on earlier on, we're also exploring how we can do that in a sort of different way. So actually using Microsoft Power Apps as a kind of, cool AI modern way of managing all the compliance data that we have rather than lots of spreadsheets and so on. So, work is being done. It's taken longer than we would have liked. We're very conscious that many employers out there would like us to have a much more usable system than they currently have to use, and that's priority.
Does that include real-time updates on where their case is progressing?
So that would be less the sponsor side of things than on the visa applicant side. So the NAO report also talks about how responsive we are to customers. I sit in something called Customer Service Group. Our vision is to put customer needs at the heart of everything we do and to be responsive and adaptive at all times. So I'll be held to account on that basis. And a lot of the customer feedback we have, the main areas across visas around application progress, where are we at with applications, with contact and with application forms and guidance and how straightforward they are. So within my remit, those are areas we've been focusing a lot on. On visa application tracking, we've clarified a lot of things in terms of our service standards, how long things take. There's a visa times processing tool which is now live on gov.uk, which tells you when you can get your application. It doesn't quite yet do what I think customers would like, which is when am I going to get my application? And that's partly because exactly when they're going to get their visa decided is a function of how many applications we have, how many staff we have, and how we flex across different routes, which means it's quite hard to accurately predict you will get it on Friday or Monday. So we try and make sure we stay within our service standards, so you will get it by the service standard, and we have short-ish service standards, certainly competitive to most countries, and by and large meet them.
Thank you very much. Anna Dixon, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to draw in some further evidence that we've received, particularly just to hone in on a couple of aspects relating to care that you've brought in effectively to address the historical problem. The first being the hubs. So these are obviously people who found themselves here. They've come in under the work visa only to then find themselves without work. I had an example of this brought to my attention actually over 2 years ago by a trade union rep who alerted to me a man in my constituency who'd been hired as a care worker from Ghana, had tied accommodation, 0 hours contract. Many of the work opportunities that were provided required him to travel. He subsequently therefore got into debt because he wasn't earning enough even to pay the rent. He raised concerns about this with the employer, was fired, and no ability obviously to get another job, even in the care sector, and no recourse to public funds, so effectively homeless and destitute. So obviously you've put in place these hubs. I've got evidence from Bradford Council in relation to the Yorkshire and Humber hub. So according to data that they've shared, there were approximately 3,750 international recruits who've been affected by revocations, i.e. withdrawal of sponsorship, as I understand it, in Yorkshire and Humber. Some 117 people have been successfully placed, but you can see the numbers still without any placement are large. And they're pointing to a number of things, both on the sort of employer side, in terms of why they're not taking them, as well as on the employee side. And I just want to touch first on the employee side, and then I'll come to the employer side with you, perhaps, Marc, in a moment. So on the displaced worker side, they're saying the fear of deportation, fear of repercussions, fear of being unable to secure new sponsorship, fear of authorities whistleblowing. They're exploring other solutions. We heard many are seeking asylum, being trafficked, or many are continuing to work for this 20 hours for non-sponsored employers, which I understand, has been brought in. But effectively, why go down the sponsorship route? If you can sort of get the 20 hours anyway. So, firstly, what are you going to do to address those issues, which are going to presumably mean that the solution that you're developed is not actually going to work?
So, I could say a couple of things, and then Marc will want to come in. And it's always difficult to generalise a bit because lots of individuals are in different circumstances. But just say a couple of things. So the kind of critical thing we are seeking to do is to do what we can from the Home Office side, working with DHSC and local areas through the hubs to support people into other employment in the care sector where they can, and that's the sort of fundamental purpose of us setting up the hubs. Those we don't run those, so sort of precisely how they operate is, I'm afraid, not a question we can answer in detail. We seek to maximise the information we can give the individual in terms of writing to them and directing them towards opportunities for being matched into a new role. We are not, as I said, cancelling revoking individuals' visas, so they remain here on a visa, and as such, while I totally acknowledge people will have a fear of deportation, it's a complicated system and it's hard to understand as an individual, particularly in sort of vulnerable, distressed situation. We are not. They are here perfectly legally on a visa, and if they need to change that visa as they change their employer, they remain here with rightful status, and we are doing that transition as quickly as we can, which I'm sure Marc can say more about. There are cases, absolutely, where we identify the risk of human trafficking, and we have modern slavery provisions to support people where we identify that, which we direct people to where we can. So we are seeking in this, essentially our objective here is to be as flexible as we can within our immigration systems to support people towards employment in the sector they came here to work in. I'm sure there are limitations to that, and that is what we are continuing to discuss with DHSC and others.
But my understanding, just to clarify, was that if they lost employment with the sponsor, they were then effectively no longer here legally because and often if the accommodation is tied, they find themselves basically destitute. So until this matching process works and another sponsoring organisation will take them on, there is a period, which for some individuals can be quite lengthy, where my understanding is that the Home Office can, they are, one, they have no recourse to public funds, and two, they are at risk of deportation.
So I think the first is more of an issue than the second. So I mean, I have here a copy of the letter that we send to migrants in the situation in which you describe, yes, where we revoke the sponsor licence, and it basically says your permission retains valid remains valid for the time being. It then flags people towards the DHSC and regional hub support processes that we have described. It gives a list of licensed employers within the care sector should they wish to go and find another job otherwise. It then flags up ethical recruiters and who isn't ethical recruiters. It details what signs of exploitation might be or otherwise, and then points people towards modern slavery helplines and so on if they feel they're being exploited, etc. So, you would hope that migrants who found themselves in a situation where they didn't have a job because of a care provider's license being revoked would then try and be incentivized to go through the matching process, because that actually would be the best option for them in many ways. As you say, that hasn't always worked. It is for DHSC and for the hubs to kind of try and make it work. There are a variety of reasons why other employers haven't been taking them on, which you touched on earlier on, and then that can mean that people will find themselves destitute or without accommodation or whatever in the meantime, and then other support services are available for them, and indeed we've seen people claiming asylum as well as an outcome.
So I want to sort of come back to some of the evidence we received. So from Unison, they'd done a survey, 3,000 people who'd come to the care sector. They were saying that 1 in 7 had paid money to an employer, 1 in 11 to a recruiter or agency before coming here, and we'll get onto this further shortly. The conditions that they're being kept in, nearly a quarter living in care company accommodation where they're expected to share a bedroom with other workers. They go on to say that employers exploit their vulnerability to working excessive hours, remaining on call even during time off, and endure discrimination and harassment without address. The Work Rights Centre says policy interventions to deal with labour exploitation under the skilled worker route have had limited effect on individuals perpetuating abuse, have left wide protection gaps for workers. They've failed to be effective because they've not addressed the power imbalance at the heart of the employer sponsorship as a whole. So can I ask, what other steps are you taking to reduce the risk of exploitation in the care sector?
There were a number of things that we have done. This is without question a kind of wider systems problem than we can tackle through Home Office immigration rules. But we have been doing a lot to try and address this issue. Some is the work we've already talked about in terms of identifying sponsors that are not behaving appropriately, taking advantage of others, not offering genuine vacancies, etc. And we've been revoking licences as Marc and Antonia were previously describing. We have seen occasions, just come back to the immigration skills charge, which we touched on earlier, should be paid by the employer. There have been cases where some or all of that cost, I think, has been pushed onto employees either directly or indirectly, and we are working to ensure that does not happen, and absolutely kind of clear that is paid for by the employer. We are, and then as described, and I try not to repeat myself, we're seeking to support people into other employment in the sector as best we can, and we are absolutely identifying the modern slavery routes, etc., where people think they are being exploited. But I don't know, Marc, you might want to add.
All the things you mentioned are sort of contrary to sponsor guidance and reasons why we've been revoking sponsor licences. UKVI, my team work very closely with a whole bunch of different agencies. So under the kind of forum of the Director for Labour Market Enforcement, they bring together GLAA, HMRC in terms of national minimum wage, ourselves, immigration enforcement, a range of different agencies in this space. And this government's been particularly, front-footed, as it were, about trying to tackle exploitation within the labour market. So UKVI play a role. We do share information. We do work with different agencies on a range of issues, not just in care. We recently played an active role with a Border Force and Police Scotland trafficking concern in the fishing industry in Scotland, which UKVI lent in quite heavily on in terms of then facilitating, as it were, work for the, again, Ghanaians in that particular incident to find alternative employment. It is a problem. I think this has just shone a lens on a wider, problem within the labour market. We have insisted on CQC registration now,
I was going to come to that. That's been in.
But CQC registration is mainly around patient issues rather than patient care issues rather than employment regulation issues. And I think I think more could be done on the care sector, would be my view.
Well, I was going to come to the fact that, again, all of this just seems like it's closing the stable door after the horse has bolted. I mean, so much of these, brought in all these people, and now suddenly we're having to try and do lots of things, both to, close down bogus sponsors. It would have been a basic thing to have made sure that these were actually legit care providers to begin with. The fact that the CQC registration wasn't required at the beginning means that a large number were actually recruitment agencies who literally had no contracts for providing care services. Now, I do want to come to this point that you made earlier about your new checks, your compliance activity now in the social care sector. Looking for genuine vacancies. Obviously, you've said there CQC registration. The Home Care Association, though, has written, and I think you were alluding to this point, and they're suggesting that the High Court has actually ruled that the Home Office approach to assessing guarantees of commissioning in care sector organisations is irrational, does not correspond to how the public sector actually commissions care. A lot of care is contracted by the NHS on a spot basis, by local authorities on very flexible contracts with no guaranteed hours in those contracts, which makes it impossible for providers to actually guarantee the full-time hours. And if they do that for overseas workers, then we're setting up a situation where we've got unequal terms and conditions, and indeed now pay, between overseas visa, those who've come on the skilled visa scheme, and domestic workers. So again, I just really want to probe, do you think your compliance checks in this sector are working?
Well, I mean, with the genuine vacancy test, we have been testing much more strongly to ensure that care providers do indeed have full-time employment for the right salary and that they will have guarantees of work when they come, in order to avoid a lot of the problems that you're talking about. Yep. If we continue to give skilled worker visas where there is no guarantee of work, we would exacerbate the problem that we've been talking about a whole bunch of people coming who didn't have any work, and we would be creating more displaced workers. So we've been working quite closely with the sector, and a number of people in my team have run multiple different sectoral events with people from all over the country, including DHSC and ADAS colleagues, but also with various care provider representatives, to try and support care providers with how can they meet our genuine vacancy tests, how can they do that, and then different people have taken different action. I mean, personally, I would like to see more robust contractual arrangement. More flexibility between local authorities and care providers in terms of how they do things, and stronger arrangements.
In a sense, is this the issue of it's an example of the failure of government departments to join up? Because in a way, the solution is for the Department of Health and Social Care and local authorities to actually be, providing contracts with guaranteed hours. I mean, it sort of sounds like the two are incompatible.
So I think we, the way I think I would sort of frame this is that if we go to the sort of, if you like, the kind of root cause analysis of the challenges of the expansion of the skilled worker route into the care sector in 2022, we made a set of decisions to do that inside the structure of the skilled worker route to enable us to bring it on stream very quickly, given the acute need and the advice we were getting from the MAC and DHSC and others. Without doubt, what we have learned is that the way the skilled worker route is structured around sponsorship and genuine vacancies does not map well onto the social care sector in particular and the way it is structured. And if we go back to the beginning in 2022, could we have thought more about how we mitigate some of those risks, and between us and DHSC foreseen some of those risks, perhaps? And that is some of what we have learned and some of what Antonia said earlier. In terms of where we are now, as Marc said, we are trying to be both kind of as flexible as we can within that structure to enable it to enable the route to work and to support people who are in the country. We've done a series of things which, in broad terms, I think are working, or in the sense of doing what we intended them to do. So we are bearing down on compliance. We are identifying employers who, in terms of the way the certificates of the licences should have worked, we've revoked them in that way, and that has left with the challenges of rematching in the individuals, which we've talked about. And we have tightened up the route in a number of ways, such that the number of people coming through it is drastically down from where it was in 2023. There are still a set of issues with the people who've come in on this route, and how do we manage that best, which we've talked about. And then, if we were in the future to be in a position about how do we think about an acute need in a sector that is more divergent from those we use the skilled worker route for generally, there are a set of things I think that at the beginning we would probably do differently from what we did in 2022.
I'm conscious that we need to pause in a moment for silence, but a very brief question, brief answer. Given all of that then, do you think it was a mistake to use the skilled worker visa for the care sector?
So I think at the time the important thing was to be able to stand up a route very quickly. The only way to do that is in an architecture that we've got. Otherwise there were a series of lead-in times in terms of setting up applications, setting up the systems, etc. And so it would have just been much more delayed. So that's a kind of question of the kind of acuteness at the time. I expect, because of the pressures on care coming out of COVID in terms of using the route, we would have used it. We would have used it. I think the question is the one about what mitigations could we have put around it in terms of caps or limits or review points or some of those sorts of things.
I'm going to suspend the sitting now. I think I want to come back to this. I don't think we've quite exhausted it yet.
We want to.
We're not suspending.
Yes, coming back on the overseas stuff when we...
We're staying live. I suppose we could just perhaps have you finished that or not?
Well, I think given the time, I don't want to get into... so I think we should...
There are more issues to raise on this, I think.
Yes, particularly about what happens overseas. I think both Clive and I have concerns about that.
Let's just sort of pause, not suspend. We're at 58 at the moment. We will be standing just before 12, and then we will resume. And Clive, there are particular things in here that I would have liked to ask. Yeah. Yes, I've done that.
We can continue with the sitting now. I think Anna Dixon wants to carry on with some of the issues that we were just discussing before the break.
Thank you very much, Clive. So within the NAO report, it highlights in paragraph 3.25 about, and I mentioned it briefly, about this sort of evidence of people being charged significant fees in their home countries. I just wondered, given the criticism here that there was potentially limited engagement with the FCDO and overseas partners, we've touched a lot on what's going on in the UK, but could you just talk a little bit more about how you're ensuring that people aren't exploited before they even come to this country?
Well, I mean, in terms of all of those different obligations, they remain with the sponsors as part of the sponsor guidance. But we have, I think it was following the IBI inspection into the adult social care route, there was a recommendation to do more in terms of supporting migrants overseas with the risk of exploitation. So we basically created something with, I think, the organisation called Work Rights, based on GLAA information, and created a kind of brochure, and that's available in all our visa application centres globally. So that's kind of the principal thing that we within UK Visas and Immigration have done in that space. Obviously, DHSC, the NHS, there's also kind of overseas recruitment, ethical recruitment practices, etc., which are there. But that's the principal action that we've taken.
Okay, so again, just sounds like, I've got examples currently where people overseas are still having agencies advertised to them, and distinguishing between those that are, exploiting and fair is really very, very difficult. And, those people will ultimately be coming through your skilled worker visa route, may find themselves here already destitute because they've sort of paid extortionate fees to even get here. And again, I just feel like there is some obligation in terms of that compliance activity.
Those are requirements within the sponsorship guidance, so they'll only be able to come if the sponsor has a licence, and that licence is only maintained if they are doing those things. Simon touched earlier on about another operation we did with Border Force, that's known as Operation Odonite, which was basically a referral process where Border Force officers were questioning and interviewing care workers at the border about, did you know what you were doing? Have you been asked to pay this? Do you know what job you're going to? What agents have you been using? Etc. That kind of questioning, and all the intelligence and referrals coming from Border Force colleagues were going into my work services hub, and then we've been taking compliance action against sponsors as a result of that. So essentially, the sponsorship system is designed on the basis that the employer is taking responsibility for who they're asking the Home Office to come to the UK and signing up to various obligations. And if they don't, then they can no longer do that, and therefore we suspend or revoke their licence. So that's the main control mechanism we have, as how we recognise that we had some extra work we could do for migrants, which is why we publish these kind of information upstream. People.
So the sponsor's requirement extends to whether there's been an agency in the country abroad, suggests who effectively makes the introduction, charging a fee there.
Yeah, so for example, in a university context, if a university wants to use a recruitment agency in Pakistan or Bangladesh in order to source international students for them, and those are not genuine students, and they come here and don't turn up and don't enrol or claim asylum or whatever, it's on the university. So the university is at risk, therefore, of losing their licence or having suspension action. So it's for the university in that context to ensure that it is only using proper agents overseas, which is why we've worked with the British Council on agent quality framework, etc., to ensure that sponsors are doing the right thing. But we can't really regulate what will be happening in terms of agents in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nigeria, and so on.
Yeah, and the thing we have added that exactly as Marc said is the sort of, if you like, the system through which we seek to control this. The thing we have added is to try and provide as much information as we can to our visa application centres, which are our footprint, the sort of home office footprint overseas, which people come through.
It's a bit different, isn't it, to university compared with some of the sponsors in the care sector. It's a different arrangement, really. It feels different, and the risks are surely greater when you've got organisations with no established base in this country who are putting themselves forward as sponsors and are then doing things in other countries that you accept you're not aware of.
The sponsorship requirements do require people, as we set out. So I think there's a difference here between the sponsors using agents, as Marc described, which is not directly within the control of the immigration system. So we, as Simon explained, provide full information to applicants on what is required, the fees, the expectations of what a sponsor should do. That's both in our online system and through our information in our visa application centres. And then we have very clear requirements on the sponsor. If the sponsor chooses to use an agent in the middle, that is not something that we can currently control directly, because those happen outside of the immigration system. But the sponsor is required to meet all the compliance checks, and we make as much information as we can available to the applicant about what is required of their sponsor and the fees and the expectations of their sponsor through our systems.
When did you become aware that some sponsors might be passing the costs of those agents and the fees paid on to the applicants, the individuals who want to come and work here?
Well, relatively soon. I mean, as I say, the route went live in February 22. I think through the course of 22, we already had some concerns around the volume of people who were coming. We were targeting. We were getting intelligence referrals from border force officers even before we did the operation Odinite, which is, what's this? This person doesn't know where they're going. They're telling me a story. They don't speak English or whatever. We're also getting referrals from in-country sources about care workers who were raising complaints or issues within the UK. So all of that information was being fed in, as I said earlier, to our work services hub, and we've been taking compliance action against those sponsors. And we also do checks before somebody gets a sponsor license. So there are a whole range of different requirements in order to get a license in the first place, around whether they are a genuine business, have the capacity to bring in migrants and so on. That was strengthened through the CQC registration element as well. But we've had a mixture of people who possibly shouldn't have gotten a license in the first place, but also genuine providers who have then either exploited people or not had work for them.
How far did you use intelligence from the Foreign Office? I mean, with any concerns they may have about what they know from their work overseas?
Well, I've got teams overseas as well who work very closely with Foreign Office colleagues, and wherever we would get any specific intelligence or referrals from Foreign Office or other UK government colleagues in countries, we would use and act on that. As I say, the Work Services Risk Hub is the kind of central pot in which all that intelligence goes, is triaged, and then we take appropriate action to either suspend the license, take immediate action to revoke it, to people who are on action plans, etc., etc.
We'll move on to just the next area. Do you think was there any element of irony, the fact that this system was established in 2022 for care workers, when at the very time Qatar's holding a World Cup, and the UK government, the Foreign Office, have been complaining bitterly for a long time to the Qatari government about the kafala system, and elements of that system are exactly replicated in what happened to some care workers under the scheme that was established by the UK government here that we're talking about.
I think, just to stand back, the NAO report was on the skilled worker route as a whole. We have a structure for the skilled worker route that, by and large, has worked very well to achieve its aims. We applied that in 2022 to an acute labour shortage, as we've discussed, that was evident, and both in terms of the information we were getting and DHSC and the care sector were passing onto us. Some of those structures have worked less well for, because of the nature of the sector and the way in which it is dispersed, and in terms of lowering the skill level, the sort of opportunities that gave to some bad actors, and without question that has given rise to some bad practice. I think it's a question of kind of how we controlled for that risk up front. Since then, we have done a huge amount with the HSC, with the directors of social care, to identify and mitigate those risks as we've gone.
I suppose the very nature of this committee is we tend to look at the things where there have been concerns expressed about the way they've operated, rather than everything that's gone superbly well. But I suppose it's just a question about, given the amount of publicity around the scheme in Qatar, which the Qatari government enormous pressure to change in the run to the World Cup, yet some elements of that seem to be exactly the same problems, and whether anyone with this natural curiosity that might have been around thought about those issues before this route was used for care workers. But perhaps we've gone into that in some detail now. We might just have a look at the application process that most applicants go through to get a visa, and the standards of performance that are laid down, which for routine cases appear to be met for the most part. So it generally is a scheme working reasonably well for the simple cases that are put before you.
Yes, I mean, look, Marc will want to go into the detail, because his teams do this work, and I think Ms. Betts, that is absolutely right. We do, as Marc says, sort of centre on providing a kind of a clear and prompt service as much as we possibly can to the customer. We have relatively short service standards which compare well, and we put a huge number of applicants and make those decisions, and that they absolutely we hit those service standards for the vast majority of simple cases, where a simple case is is both sort of literally reasonably straightforward, but where we get the documentation and the information that we need from the applicant, first time round or very promptly thereafter. There are cases where we are awaiting further information from applicants, where we can go where they become so-called complex cases, which go beyond that time. But the vast majority we are deciding within our SLAs of 15 days or whatever they are for any particular route.
Yeah, so I mean, for the skilled worker route, there's two stages to the process. There's a sponsor licensing process where there's a service standard of 8 weeks, and despite an increase, I think, of the number of licensed sponsors from about 30,000 in 2019 before the launch of the route to 110,000 now, so a massive increase in licensed sponsors. We've stayed within those service standards of 8 weeks throughout, and the number of days to process sponsor license has dropped quite considerably. We also offer a priority 10-day service for fast-tracking certain pre-license applications, which was capped but now is uncapped. So actually, if you need to get onto the sponsor license and you pay us a priority fee, you'll get that within 10 days. For migrant applications themselves, our service standards for entry clearance for visas is 3 weeks or 15 working days. For leave to remain applications, it's 8 weeks, but for the health and care route, it's again 15 working days. We also offer priority services of 5 days and a super priority visa service of next day. So actually, if you are wanting to bring somebody into the UK for skilled work, you can get a sponsor license in 10 days, and then for a fee, you can get a visa in a day, which is second to none in terms of global competitiveness for the visa operation. Our customer service standards are very high, and satisfaction rates are high. Our target in published stats is 98.5% of applications to meet those standards. The actual day-to-day target is 100%. It's a total given that at any moment in time our operation is working to try and process all visas within service standards. The 98.5% is to allow for the fact that there may be some IT bugs, for example, which means a case is affected by a bug, and then it would let the whole target fail because a small number of applications were affected by something like that. A bit earlier in the report, it drops down to about 94%, and again, that was displacement of staff into the Ukraine visa route, which meant we weren't processing as highly as 98.5%, but that is currently being met.
No, you're back to 98.5% now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The one issue that was raised, I think, in the NAO report was that complex cases aren't included in that figure. Indeed, there's no particular target for complex cases.
Correct. So they are included on transparency stats. So we differentiate between straightforward cases, which are cases which basically we can determine on the basis of the application that's been made, and then non-straightforward, or it's referred to in the report as complex cases, which are cases which we can't determine within the SLA, usually for reasons outside of our control. So what happens there? So a reason might be we need to write out to the applicant for further information because they didn't provide it in the first place, and they may not provide that information in time. So on day 14 of a day 15 service standard, we write to the applicant and say, we haven't received your information, we're taking your case out of service standard. It doesn't mean we forget about it, but it just can't be resolved within service standard. It may be because there's a pending prosecution. So the oldest current live case for in-country applications is a pending criminal prosecution going through the courts. We have a policy not to determine those applications until that's resolved. It could be because we are carrying out national security or other checks which a third-party agency needs to do before we can issue a visa. So we don't have a service standard for those non-complex, or so those complex cases or non-straightforward ones, because essentially we can't determine it. It's not an element, it's not within our gift to conclude the case. If we could, we would. We do chase them down, so if they are a local authority referral, we will follow up with local authority. If the customer hasn't supplied the information, we will require it of them. And we do publish transparently in our transparency data the percentage of and the absolute number of applications which are non-straightforward, so that it's totally transparent. We're not hiding anything. We just don't think it's something that would be correctly subjected to a service level agreement.
An observation in the NAO report was that the number of complex cases as a percentage rises when the number of applications overall rises. So you're struggling to meet the time limits on the cases, so you put more cases into complex to avoid the 98.5% monitor figure.
That's certainly a reading that you could make of the NAO report. The period they specify is July to October 23, and as referred to before, in August 23, we introduced both the genuine vacancy test on the certificate of sponsorship side, but also the genuineness test on the migrant side. So we were basically applying far greater scrutiny to applications and asking for more information from individuals at that time, which they were either not supplying within the 15 days or required other work. It could also be, for example, that if a migrant has made an application to a sponsor and the sponsor's had their license suspended, so not revoked yet, but suspended pending further investigation, we wouldn't be able to process that migrant's application, and therefore it would be put on hold until that suspension had been done, in which case the case would be deferred non-straightforward at that point. So I think there's a correlation between a busy period and the increased proportion of non-complex cases, but I don't think it's reject the accusation, if not that you were making one, but the suggestion of the reading of the NAO report one might have that we were deliberately gaming our performance figures by calling cases non-straightforward when they weren't.
Anna Dixon.
Yes, obviously as constituent MPs we get quite a lot of casework through, including relating to visa applications. I just want to share very briefly, I will try and be brief with it, one case which I think illustrates the challenge of not having any targets for your non-straightforward cases. So, care assistant from Zimbabwe, she arrived in April 2023 under a skilled worker visa, single mother, required to leave the 10-year-old son in Zimbabwe. She believed this was temporary. She applied twice for the child's visa, and I'm going to stress, submitting all required documentation, so sole custody letter, an affidavit from the child's father granting permission, etc. Anyway, they were both refused because they didn't accept this as evidence for sole custody. So it's gone to administrative review in June 2024. She's now got a court order proving sole custody, and yet she's been informed that the process could take 12 months or more, in which time a distressed 10-year-old is stranded away from his mother in Zimbabwe. Obviously, this does predate the restriction on dependence, so it shouldn't be affected by that. So I just use that as an illustration. So once, this very, high compliance with your 15 weeks, somebody tips over into non-straightforward, I mean, surely there should be at least some measures, metrics, targets around that, because there is a risk otherwise that cases like this then do languish for very long periods.
So, I mean, just hearing what you were saying there, the if you've got a sole child coming to meet a sole carer parent in the UK case there, that would raise safeguarding flags for us, that if the person's in full-time employment in the UK, how they're going to look after their child. So that would trigger, I think, a range of checks that we would want to do. So not just information from the individual applicant, but also safeguarding checks that we might make in the UK, and therefore asks of local authorities or others around that. And that may deem indeed the case to be non-straightforward whilst those are done. It sounded like from what you said that we then had refused the visa, so it had been concluded, i.e. it was no longer straightforward. It was decided once those checks were done. But then the admin review process has been ongoing since, was my understanding. So that is different.
Are the timescales for the administrative review process to conclude?
So I don't know whether we have targets on admin review. I do know that there have been delays. It's a different part of the department which deals with those, but there have been delays in dealing with admin reviews. And that certainly is something that we probably definitely should do better at in terms of concluding admin reviews.
So would you agree greater transparency at a minimum, and potentially looking to also set some improvement targets around these other areas once people are outside of the straightforward case?
I think it's a really important question, without doubt. I think the reason the way we operate as we do at the moment is to be transparent about the numbers of non-straightforward cases, and to, as Marc said, we are very active in trying to sort of follow through individual cases, both those where we're just awaiting documents and it shouldn't take that much longer, to the much more complex, much more long-standing ones. The reason we haven't set a service standard for those non-straightforward cases is there's such a wide variety of cases on the one hand, and secondly, there's a wide range of things in lots of them that we just don't control. So, at the limit, for sure, where we're waiting for a prosecution, it to some extent takes as long as it takes. But what we are not doing is saying that we aren't trying to answer cases as quickly as we can in all cases, or that we're not trying to sort of follow it through. Underneath that, as with any sort of big volume service and complex service of this sort, there will be some individual cases where we need to make sure we sort of learn particular lessons or identify bits of the wider system where we need to improve our processes and systems, and we will and continue to do that. But at the moment, we don't have a plan to pin in a particular service standard for those non-straightforward cases.
Can I just stress, we don't forget about them. We call our caseworkers decision makers. The job's to take decision. We need to know where every single case in our caseload is, and that we are actively tracking those. So if we're deferring a case because there's an outstanding policy issue, or there are checks which are required of a third-party agency which isn't ours, and so on, we have teams of people in our workflow who will be chasing those up and trying to resolve those cases as quickly as possible, not least because we get asked by customers, where's my visa, have you not made a decision, because we get complaints and we have to respond to those. So not having a service standard for cases outside of our control in this way doesn't mean that we don't care or we're not trying to resolve those cases.
Yeah, but we know that human behaviour with inside organisations, if you've got one element where there are very public targets and service standards and other areas where they're not, then, you know, there is the risk that those get priority over others. And I just, I will finish here. I was going to say chair, deputy chair, but just by noting, I feel I've sort of noticed my reaction to your comments about, you know, a working single parent. I mean, obviously, we don't question working single parents' ability to look after their children, and I think in most cases we would think that a child's welfare is better served by being with their mother, but that's obviously...
Yeah. Deputy Chair, can I just say one thing very, very briefly to the point about you know, the behaviour of organisations where there are some areas with targets and some... It comes back to something that Antonia said right at the beginning, which is the way in which she and I and the Directors General operate our kind of accountability down the line. And we have monthly discussions where we're looking at the workflow across all of our different areas of business, and we can see, you know, where the number of cases in that workflow is going up, where it's going down, where our decision making is getting faster or slower. And Marc and indeed other operational directors have moved resources around to address that as best we can.
And it's one brief question from Chris Kate.
Yes, can I very quickly talk about customer experience? So this is 3.7, 3.8. I'm conscious of our time. I did want to get into this a little bit more. But given that figure 8 in this shows that you are getting good feedback from your customers on the bits of the process that they don't like or they're having difficulties with, what assurances can you give the committee and those who've taken the time to engage with you and give you the information that you are listening and you are learning and you are improving the customer experience based on the feedback that you're given?
I sit within Customer Services Group, and our vision is to put customer needs at the heart of everything we do and to be responsive and adaptive at all times. And one of the ways in which we have looked to carry that out is by, in 2022, we set up service management teams across across UKVI. So those are teams who basically look at the end-to-end customer journey.
I'm doing it because I'm conscious of the time. I just need the assurance that all of this feedback is actually being listened to and acted on. It's not just read, it's being ingested into the system and it's being read. So just the assurance.
Where you can have it. We hold ourselves as strongly to account in terms of driving up customer experience scores through eliminating pain points and through generally improving the customer experience as we do anything else. And therefore, if we get feedback that there is a pain point in the customer journey that we can address and do something about, we will.
And just to add to that, where complaints come through, so if you look at the sort of problem side of it, the Independent Commission of Complaints, a post that was set up coming out of Wendy Williams' review, writes to the department where there were sort of systemic issues, and she sees a number of complaints in a single area. Directors General meet with her. I meet with her on a recurring basis. I share those with the ICIBI. That gives him the opportunity, if he needs to do a review in a certain area, to make sure that we are sort of using all of that information and intelligence to help us improve our services.
I think that as MPs, we can tell you from the casework that we receive that we do get some frustrated applicants coming in. So we can certainly see that there's an issue. Your target is 80%. You want an 80% good feedback response. Can I suggest to you that 100% should be your target, and then we'll measure against that. But aiming for 80% as the measure of we're doing well does not seem to be putting the customer experience at the heart of the process. It seems to be putting 4 out of 5 customers at the heart of the process. So more of a comment from me that I would consider our target of 100% to be a laudable thing to aim for.
So yeah, I mean,
final response, please.
Our customer satisfaction target is 80%. Our complaints response target is 20 working days. I mean, I completely agree with you. I mean, I try and exceed my target. We internally we use something called the Net Experience Score, which is like the Net Promotion Score, and I try and drive that up as high as possible. So yes, 80% would be arbitrary. If it was 90%, it'd be even better.
Well, order brings us to the end of our proceedings for today. Thank the witnesses very much for attending and answering a lot of questions. An uncorrected transcript of this hearing will be published on the committee's website in the coming days, and the committee will consider the evidence provided today, and will produce a report in due course.